You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 119.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, violinist, teacher, and high-performance coach for musicians, Dr. René Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day as you're listening to this. I bring you a very impactful conversation today with the one and only Rachel Barton Pine. As a violinist, Rachel performs with the world's leading orchestras, including the Chicago Symphony, Vienna Symphony, Philadelphia Orchestra, Royal Philharmonic, and Camerata Salzburg. She's recorded 39 acclaimed albums, many of which have hit the top of the charts. She's appeared on The Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, CNN, PBS NewsHour, A Prairie Home Companion, and NPR's Tiny Desk, and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, LA Times, and New York Times. During the pandemic, Rachel performed the entire solo violin part of 24 different violin concertos for her live weekly series 24 in 24 Concertos from the Inside. Her RBP Foundation assists young artists through its instrument loan program and grants for education and career, and runs the groundbreaking Music by Black Composers project, which was launched in 2001. Rachel holds prizes from several of the world's leading competitions, including a gold medal at the 1992 Bach International Violin Competition in Leipzig, Germany. She performs on the 1742 ex Bezzini ex Solda Guarneri del Gesù violin on lifetime loan from her patron. This conversation is packed with extremely applicable tips and deeply inspiring wisdom. Among many topics, Rachel will cover how to prepare and handle a large amount of repertoire, the concept of cumulative lifetime hours, the importance of revisiting pieces with a fresh approach, the communicative and emotional power of physical expressions. She tells us about how she prepared to perform with the Chicago Symphony on 4-hour notice, and she shares the important missions of the RBP Foundation and the Music by Black Composers anthologies. This is an episode that you're going to want to revisit often. And there's also a special treat for you today. Stay tuned at the end of the interview to listen to Rachel perform the last movement of Joseph White's Violin Concerto in F-sharp minor from her recording Violin Concertos by Black Composers of the 18th and 19th centuries. You can click the link in the show notes to find more information about this recording and to get your own copy. Let's go to the show. Rachel Barton Pine, it's an incredible honor to have you on the show today.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Rachel, you wear many hats. In addition to being one of the world's greatest violinists and an incredibly versatile artist, you're a spectacular and eloquent clinician, an educator, and a true change maker in the artistic community. And before we dive in all of those great topics of practicing, performing, and artistic creation, I'd love to hear in your own words how your artistic path has unfolded.
Gosh, that's such an interesting way of framing that question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that precisely that way before. Basically, I'm completely passionate about the violin. I started playing when I was 3 and decided that it was what I was meant to do with my life by the time I was 5. And part of that decision was not just my own pleasure that I got from exploring music alone in my room, practicing, hearing music, creating music, but also sharing music with people was really the driving force behind it, seeing how much music could move people and uplift people. And so really the idea of serving others through music has been, sort of the reason I do what I do. And that's, through all the myriad and, varied activities that I've done over the years, that's really been the constant, is just, how is what I'm doing trying to serve the greater good in whatever way I can.
That is so inspiring to hear. Rachel, I have so many questions for you, and I'm thinking that a good place to start would be a topic that I'm sure so many of the listeners and myself are curious about: how to prepare and handle a large amount of repertoire. This is something you have undoubtedly so much experience with, and I'm sure you have amazing insight for us. You performed tons of different repertoire and different genres all over the world all the time. During COVID, you had this fantastic project of concertos from the inside. You always seem to have a million projects going on at the same time. So please talk to us about what that looks like for you to handle so much repertoire.
Yeah, so for most of my career, I've never given orchestras a short list of, these are the only concertos I'm willing to do this season. I kind of just love to see what comes my way. I mean, I'll certainly have suggestions, like maybe an album has recently come out, so I would love to do the concertos that I recorded to kind of help promote the album, or an album that I'm hoping to do soon, so I want to get a couple more times of those concertos under my belt. Maybe just a concerto I haven't done in a while and I'm kind of missing it. Maybe there's an anniversary year, the usual reasons. So I'll definitely have each season a kind of list of suggestions if asked for. But I always just wait first to see if there's a request. And, most of the time I try to honor that request. If I'm already doing 5 different concertos that month and now this would be a 6th, then I would feel like it would diminish the quality of everything to add it in. Then, of course, I'm going to say I really wish I could, but it would not be in the best interest of the audience. But most of the time I'm really loving just sort of the surprise of, oh, I didn't know I was going to do a Britten concerto, but now I am, yay. Or just, it's just kind of fun to have that mystery of, I don't know what I'm performing next year. And to have a constant variety. Now, sometimes I think to myself, gosh, am I just terribly masochistic? I could be, having an easier time of it, like some of my colleagues, just repeating some concertos instead of always prepping a different one. But then every time I do prep a different one, I'm like, whoa, I'm so glad I got to do this piece, and I'm so glad I got to do that piece, and I love them all, and I feel so lucky that I get to experience more of them. So what does that mean in practical terms? I tend to look at my calendar in 6-month chunks. So I'll look and see, okay, here are all the things I'm going to be doing in X amount of time. And then, there are 3 factors that go into determining how much prep any given piece is going to take. One is its inherent level of difficulty. Clearly, the Mendelssohn Concerto is shorter and easier, I mean, quote unquote, because obviously making it beautiful is a lifetime pursuit. But, there's not fingered octaves all over the place, whereas Paganini 1 needs, wood shitting with all of the passage work, right? That being said, if for some reason I hadn't played the Mendelssohn in 5 years, which is a silly example because that would never happen, but let's say theoretically I hadn't played the Mendelssohn Concerto in 5 years, whereas I had just performed Paganini 1 6 times in the last 8 months, then actually I would probably just need to, throw the Paganini in the microwave and reheat it, whereas the Mendelssohn I would need to carefully revisit. And so in that case, the Mendelssohn would take more prep time than Paganini 1. And then, of course, there's a third factor, which is cumulative lifetime hours, which I found. And, I hope that it's not just, my genetic luck that makes this happen. I hope that this is true for others, or maybe even for everyone. If you practice well and get good habits in your fingers, that at a certain point they stick. And from what I've read about the brain, and laying down those neuron pathways, I think there is something to that. Like nowadays, I'll revisit Beethoven, even if it's been a couple of years, it's right there in my fingers. Whereas it used to be like, oh my gosh, I got to get every note back in tune. And now it's like, I'm always kind of shocked, like, wait, how could it already be in tune? And I realized that I actually passed that magic threshold of cumulative numbers of hours, and it finally stuck after all these years. So those 3 factors, I determine how much prep I'm going to need for each piece. And then I think about, when am I going to have time for that prep? Because I can't always start piece B after piece A concludes, and then start piece C after piece B concludes, and so on. Especially if it's new rep I've never played, and then I have to like learn it from scratch and interpret it. And this also goes for if it's I always think of interpretations as having a shelf life. Like if I played Tchaikovsky last month, there's no point in reinterpreting it this month. I haven't grown that much as an artist, and that would just be a waste of time. But if it's been 10 years, I might think, maybe it's time to, question my previous decisions, and, just really come at it with a blank slate and think, okay, why am I doing what I do? What are the other options? Listen to a bunch of recordings, go back to the score, look at different editions of, artists that left us fingerings and bowings before the recorded era, all that kind of thing, and just, play around. And what's interesting is sometimes I come to the exact same conclusions, because no matter how much I grow it as a person, there is something fundamental about me that's always still me. And then other times I'll be like, oh my gosh, this idea is so much better. Oh, wow, good thing I stopped doing my stupid old idea. And sometimes, admittedly, I'll start doing something different just because it's different, and I'm like bored with the way I used to do it. And in Bach, a lot of the time I'll say, well, if I was doing it, way number one, then I'll switch to way number two. But admittedly, if I'd been doing it way number two, I would have switched to way number one. So neither is better or preferred. It's just, it's time to mix it up, which will feel more fresh to me, because now I'm doing something that I haven't been doing again and again. But other times you do keep doing that thing you've been doing again and again, because now it's really seasoned. And even if you can't argue it's the best interpretation, because it's yours and you've made it your own, it's going to speak more deeply, because you have more experience with it. So there are all of those kind of thought processes. So if I need a large amount of time to either reinterpret or interpret or learn something new for the very first time, then I have to carve out a chunk. So I might think, okay, I'm playing this piece in May. I've got some time in December. I'm going to spend 2 weeks, working on it. And then, throw it in the freezer and reheat it when the time comes. Or maybe actually kind of keep it going on the back burner and do a few minutes on it every day between now and then. So I often will do things in a seemingly illogical order, practice the piece that I'm performing in March during those 3 free days that I have in January, because I know if I don't, it's going to be February and I'm going to go, oh, shoot, I don't have 3 free days between now and the concert. Oh, I wish I'd practiced it in January. So you have to be kind of super organized and make a plan and stick to the plan. And that even comes down to the micro level of your daily practice, like which section of which piece am I going to do for how many minutes and focus on what. But it seems like a lot of extra work, but honestly, after a while, it becomes very intuitive, and it just kind of feels like the lifestyle you're living, and it doesn't seem burdensome at all. And it's kind of fun, to practice the piece for 4 months hence and get excited about looking forward to playing it and things like that. The thing that I wish I never had to do in my life is practicing after a concert on the same day. The last thing you ever wanted, much as you might love the violin, the last, and I think this is pretty universal, the last thing you ever want to do after a performance is do some more practicing that same day before you go to bed. That is just like torture. And every once in a while, there's no help for it. And you just finished a concerto, you've got a recital in 2 days. You're like, I have to practice tonight, or I will not necessarily play the best recital I could. And you're just like, oh my gosh, I am suffering here. But then I just remind myself, I'm lucky to be doing this profession, and the recital's going to be fun. And sometimes we just have to slog it out. So
yeah. You've just used so many expressions that I'm going to adopt in the future. This concept of cumulative lifetime hours is so powerful. Absolutely. And careful planning, coming back to the repertoire, practicing it, putting it aside to let it kind of, simmer.
marinate.
Yeah, marinate. Absolutely. And of course, what you said about the shelf life for the interpretation, that is so true. And that allows us to make conscious decision rather than go to just our defaults. This is it's such great insight. And sometimes you talked about putting things in the freezer, and then there are moments in life where you can't let it thaw on the counter. So, for example, um, you had an instance this summer, I believe, where you were called in to sub in at the last minute with the Chicago Symphony. And I've got to ask, because I think a lot of us are wondering how circumstances like this, how that unfolds. What does it entail to fill in at the last minute for an indisposed musician?
Yeah, so that was like undoubtedly the craziest circumstance of the type that I'll ever experience in my lifetime. And
I remember there were stories where you were warming up in the car on the way there.
well, no, I didn't have the instrument out as I was driving, but I was studying the score and doing like that mental practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've done sub jobs through the years. Sometimes there's been a visa issue. One time, a young lady got mugged on the streets of New York 5 days before her Shostakovich, and her arm got bruised or something. She was okay, but gosh, I felt so bad for her, and she certainly couldn't do the rehearsal period under those circumstances. Yeah, so I've had a week's notice, 5 days notice, 2 days notice, but this was literally 4 hours notice. Yeah, it was 4 p.m., just after 4 p.m., and the call came in, can you be on stage at 8? So, I didn't have time for emotion, either fear or excitement. No negative or positive. I just went right into implementation mode. And the first thing I did is I made a list. Okay, what do I have to do before I can walk out the door? So I knew that my daughter was attending the Heifetz camp virtually. So I knew I needed to get in touch with her teachers and tell them that she would be Zooming into her class from the car and the backstage. I knew that I needed to pack her dinner. And then it was like, okay, I got to get my makeup. I hadn't, I've been doing, a million Zoom performances, but, not large stage performances with the audience at a distance. So I was like, okay, where did I store my big venue eyelashes? It's all these kind of things. So it's like, okay, gather the makeup, gather the hair stuff, gather the clothes, the gown. And then I was like, oh, wait, Prokofiev 1 is, a tricky one for memory. I knew I had all the bits of it memorized, but not necessarily in the right order. And I didn't want all my brain energy to be going to, wait, how does this piece go? And, for the actual playing to suffer. I needed to put 100% of my energy towards, playing it beautifully. So I knew that I needed to just have the sheet music in front of me as a cheat sheet. But because I had not performed it with the sheet music in front of me ever before, I didn't have it configured for page turns. It was just, the sheet music that you use to study when you're practicing. And if there's a page turn, whatever, because you're practicing it to be memorized. So I actually had to okay, I have to photocopy and shrink and cut and tape and make a performance part. So I did that. And let's see, what else was it? I think that was about it and then, so in the car, I made sure, first of all, I did 2 types of mental practice. One was just kind of going through and almost like physically feeling your fingers and your bow in your head, like to just think how my part gets played. And the second one was remembering how it fits with the orchestra and thinking about the phrasing, the character, the entrances after tutti bits, all of that sort of thing. Actually, I did listen to a recording as I was doing that to hear the orchestra part. And I discovered that a very famous violinist plays a few wrong notes in their recording. I won't reveal who. But I was like, wait, have I been playing wrong notes all my life? And then I was like, no, wait, he just played wrong notes. Oh, my God. That was kind of hilarious. But it also made me feel like, hey, you know what? If I play a couple wrong notes tonight, such and such, this very famous violinist has wrong notes in their recording, so I'll be fine. So that was actually maybe like a really perfect thing to happen. So then I also, in the car, was planning out what am I going to be working on backstage, because I knew that I didn't have enough time to adequately practice every measure. And I actually decided that rather than make the most difficult passages slightly less sloppy, that it would be better to make those things that could be totally nailed as perfect as possible. So I actually prioritized quote unquote easier stuff, melodic sections with difficult shifts, for example, things where I needed to have a really beautiful tone color, make sure I knew what I intended. So everything except the most hard passages. I made sure the most hard passages were like adequately faked so I could kind of get through them and they would have the right effect, but they weren't going to be up to my standard of cleanliness. And since they couldn't, I was like, why make them slightly less bad and waste all my time, and then everything, and then nothing in the concerto will be great. You see what I mean? So it went against everything inside of me to like go out on stage knowing that there for sure that there were going to be some unclean passages, but it was either that or the orchestra wouldn't have gotten to perform the concerto at all. So I just had to accept that circumstance and just, but yeah, and we didn't have any rehearsal with the orchestra. The orchestra had already done the dress rehearsal before Midori had to go to the hospital. So, but they knew how it went. I knew how it went. There were moments as the concert was going along where I was like, oh, I wish we could have just like worked on that timing together or, whatever. But, it obviously it all hung together. And Marin also called it a drive-by concert. It was really fascinating to me to actually discuss, because I would have never thought about such a thing had it not happened. But to know that I would be able to do it, and to realize that the reason I knew that was because I had done, careful, what you might call correct practicing of that concerto 5 months earlier. I think it was. And I think it was March that I performed it. Now this was July, or 4 months, 5 months. Yeah, something like that. And, and that even though it was that many months ago, and that paired with the fact that, of course, I had been playing it through the years since I was a student, right? So you had that underlying grounding in the piece being very deeply rooted in your memory, but then the more recent, finger memory of having just practiced all of those passages really, really carefully, and with the really the pickiness of the practicing and the quantity of the practicing, that I had done it lots and lots and lots and lots of times, and that actually was able to carry over, to that memorable day.
Talk about cumulative lifetime hours.
Yeah. But had I not done it 5 months earlier, and had it just been the 2 years or 3 years ago concert, then I would not have been able to pull it off. And I would have known I wouldn't have been able to pull it off, because I did have to do that wood shedding of, okay, wait, how does this passage go? And like, okay, let's practice it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times the week that I performed it in, March 2021. And then because I'd done that recently, I knew that I could do it in July 2021 with just the quick warm up.
This is such an incredible example of mind over finger. What I love in what you said is you didn't just jump on the violin and played through the piece 7 times before you headed there. You really took the time to prioritize and assess what was the most crucial things to cover first. And it's a really incredible story.
The other element that, I had to keep in mind, which was so interesting, is that since I had last been at Ravinia, which was not that long ago, they had now installed like the big screens at either side of the stage, where they have like the close-ups as the show is going along. And I remember the first time I encountered that was with the Vancouver Symphony, and somehow the way theirs are placed, every time you look at the conductor to communicate, you see a big, huge U in the same sight line, and be like, whoa. And then like you get distracted and you're like, oh, stop looking at your huge self. Back to the music. And now I've had them in my life from time to time, and I'm like not shocked by it anymore. But so that wasn't a problem at Ravinia, getting distracted. But I realized with the close-ups that my facial expressions were going to be seen like really
Mm-hmm.
largely by the audience. And, when you're fully prepared with a piece, of course, you're going to just be in the zone, into the music. The fingers are going to be flying without you even thinking about them because you've, over prepared, and you can just let your subconscious muscle memory take over. And it's almost like your fingers play themselves and you just get to express, right? But in this, and then of course you have all the emotions in the world and it shows on your face without your thinking about it. But in this case, where I did have to think, okay, make sure you do that shift and make sure that you do this bowing, and, where I was still thinking about things that I wouldn't normally have been focusing on in concert, I realized that I could sound perfectly expressive while having, concentration face on my face the entire time, which would not have, with this being a, of somewhat visual art these days, more and more lately. I realized that would not have actually communicated the music to the audience adequately if I just had sort of a neutral concentration face on, regardless of the character of the moment of the piece, even if it sounded exactly the same. So I actually, it was a rare circumstance where I had to remind myself, okay, look cheerful over here, look serene over here, look, intense over here, and actually have remind myself to have the facial expressions that would have occurred naturally had I been normally prepared for a planned ahead concert. So that's not fingers. That's, I guess, mind over facial expressions or something. But
mind over face.
yeah, but I did actually have to, and so I think that and that can sometimes, I think, be something that, especially with people who are still in their student years. I've heard some wonderful performances where the kid just looked like they were worried or concentrating, and actually it can do the opposite. I mean, it can sometimes, what's the right way of saying, how they say that if you physically force yourself to smile, then you actually get certain chemicals and you feel happier. And, that's not, obviously, I know that's a fraught topic and you shouldn't just tell somebody depressed, oh, just smile. But, in the course of your daily existence, maybe, that's definitely something that exists. Right. And, so I think, reminding people about how they're communicating with their whole selves as they're playing this music, and not to just think of their fingers in the end.
Yeah.
And that was hard because I had to be like, okay, show this character and remember this shift.
Yes. And interestingly enough, in that moment, there are so many things to do. The circumstances may be stressful, and having to focus on something like the facial expression can, in a certain way, help taking your mind away from all of the overthinking and the overanalyzing, and let your fingers do what they know how to do so well without you.
That's a great point. That's absolutely true. If you train, I would say that some of the details of tone production, right? You have the various vectors of where in the bow you are. Bow distribution, so you can call it bow speed, and then you have bow weight, and then you have contact point between the bridge and fingerboard. And those in infinite combinations, can create infinite tone colors. But, so piano, it's like, well, is it a thick, slow bow, heavy bow, condensed, soft sound? Is it a floaty, soft sound over the fingerboard? Is it a, light, flowing, soft sound in the middle of the string with a fast but light bow? Piano doesn't tell you much. You have to decide which piano. And all of these decisions, of course, are related to which emotion are you trying to portray. And then the same thing with vibrato. You've got wide versus narrow on one vector. You've got fast versus slow on the other vector, and where that intersection point comes. Is it narrow and fast for that anticipatory feeling? Is it slow and wide for that warm, loving feeling? What vibrato is it? And so all those combinations of the bow technique and the left hand technique ultimately express, various feelings. And if you are picky enough, when you're training your body in your younger years, or at any point in time when you get around to doing all that annoying work, then actually, at a certain point, happily, thank goodness, you don't have to do that for the rest of your life. Like I can literally think cute, and my vibrato knows I should be narrow, and my bow knows I should be a little bouncy. And it's like my body translates that. It's like driving, an automatic car instead of using a stick shift.
Yeah.
It's like your body knows, oh, I'm going this speed. I know to put it into third gear without thinking about it. And so actually sometimes, if you do think the emotion, then the body translates. But only if you've spent lots and lots of super annoying years consciously thinking about all of those variables to train your body to have those associations.
Yeah, all of those neural pathways. It's so true what you're saying, to put in all of the mindful work so that when you step on stage, you can have the freedom to just execute.
Yeah, that's what I always say to students. This is going to be really, really hard and not fun at all. But if you do it for a while, then you don't have to do it forever. Like you will get to a point where you no longer have to do it, or at least not to that degree. You still want to, check in with yourself, make sure you haven't accidentally, developed a mutation of some sort, a bad habit that crept up on you. But that type of work you have to do when you're building those habits is not something you have to continue the rest of your life, which is a big relief and makes it, I think more motivating to do it in the first place, knowing that it's not what you're stuck with forever.
Rachel, you just mentioned your students, and I want to invite all of the listeners to go on your website, go on YouTube, watch all of these amazing resources that you have out there. One of my favorite things about you is, aside from your wonderful playing, of course, is how clear you are and eloquent you are when you teach, when you lead a master class. And we see it on just unfolding in front of us, where the student sees massive progress in such a short amount of time because you're so adept at guiding them through a reflection and some realizations. So I'm going to invite all of the listeners to check out all of the master classes you have online and all of the resources on your website, because we can hear it as you explain things right now, how the concepts are so clear in your head and you've done the work. So when you explain it, the results are coming.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. I always try to do the best I can, and hopefully I'm being of some help to those I work with. These days, the touring is so intense. I don't have any students of my own. I do a tremendous amount of teaching, master classes, workshops, one-off supplemental lessons for other people's students. And one of the main reasons I haven't, taken the plunge and added a professorship to my plate is because I'm still the daily practicing parent of my own daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as she's gotten older, she's only, gotten more hours per day of practicing that she does. And it's a full-time job, actually, the number of hours per week I practice with her in totality. But that's actually been absolutely fascinating. And I keep thinking I want to write a blog or do something like to chronicle my journey as a practicing parent, but literally there's never time. But I've obviously done my own practicing, both with a practicing parent in my younger years and then on my own as I moved past that to the present. And I used to have a studio with my own students that I saw on a weekly basis, and now do a lot of, as I said, supplemental teaching. But I feel like being the daily, my daughter has teachers because I think that's a good structure to say, okay, we have to prepare for your Thursday lesson and to get that extra input. But certainly, I'm going beyond just the teacher's assignment. I'm helping her and with other things that I notice, since I happen to be a violinist myself. So it's not exactly teaching, but it's not exactly the practicing that, for example, my mom did, where she didn't know anything about the violin and was limited in the ways that she could help me. She did a fabulous job. So I'm doing that on a daily basis. And I feel like it's just such an interesting journey and has, helped me improve both in my own practicing and in my teaching, and just watching something unfold, with that gradually and, and figuring out, minute to minute, what does my daughter need, watching her journey kind of ebb and flow with different needs at different times. And yeah, it's just absolutely fascinating to be somebody else's practice partner, or even just to observe somebody else's practicing on a continual basis. I've learned so much.
It's a real adventure. Rachel, you're a powerhouse of an artist, but your impact goes so much further than your incredible playing. I mean, your performance schedule alone is in itself a full-time job and would be enough for most people. But you're also a dynamic force in the fields of education and philanthropy, and you have found such incredible ways, I think, of marrying both in the many projects that you oversee. There are two in particular that I would love to speak with you about, or rather, would love you to tell us about: the RBP Foundation and its amazing work, and the Music by Black Composers collections. So, can you tell us about those things, how it came about, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I grew up in a very financially struggling family. My father was unemployed for most of my childhood, so it was always like, okay, how are we going to buy groceries this week and put enough gas in the car to be able to drive off to the lessons in the suburbs? I mean, it was kind of that level of just, day to day, the electricity and phone were often shut off. And then it was like, okay, my teacher just assigned the next concerto. How am I going to buy the sheet music? Of course, I was on scholarship, but a scholarship doesn't pay for your piano accompanist, your concert clothes, airfare to competitions, recording sessions, just all of those extras, bow rehairs, etc. And so there were various extended family, my church, different arts patrons who helped me out in various ways along the way. And so I started my foundation for the purpose of young artist support, to kind of give back and help, because there are competitions, but sometimes, by the time you've paid your piano accompanist to make the, to play for you for the competition, and then you have to pay your piano accompanist again to play for the winter concert, then sometimes even if you win first prize, you're actually in the red.
Mm-hmm.
And you get obviously the experience, you get the credential. It's a valuable thing to do for both your career and your education. But and then what about all the other students who didn't win first prize? So competitions don't make up the difference. And competitions are just who played the best that day. It could be a kid who's not intending to make a life in music. It could be a kid who comes from a wealthy family. So our foundation, and actually we're still unique in this arena. We evaluate students on the quality of their playing, but also their goals in life, that they're not planning to major in medicine. And then also, obviously, their demonstrated financial need. And then we also have an instrument loan program, which is, pretty standard of its type, but there are never enough. So we're one more. So we've supported more than 100 young artists at this point, and it's just been really meaningful to be able to make a difference in their lives. I'll give you one really good example. There was a girl who lived in upstate New York and got a scholarship to go to Juilliard pre-college. And her mother was a single mother raising the family, and they couldn't afford the gas, tolls, and parking to come to Manhattan every week for the free lessons. So the foundation covered the gas, tolls, and parking. And, it's like one is 100% scholarship, not enough, right?
Right.
So it's those little things that are seemingly so little but make a huge difference. So then I had a 501c3 not-for-profit entity, and this Music by Black Composers thing, I had made an album in 97 called Violin Concertos by Black Composers of the 18th and 19th centuries, basically Afro-Caribbean and Afro-European composers from the 17 and 1800s. And I made the album literally because I loved the music. I naively was not thinking of the social justice or representation issues. It was just, this music has been never recorded or rarely recorded. And I love it. And it seems like a fun set of repertoire to do. And that was it back then. And that actually really was life-changing, because I've made other albums of under-recognized repertoire that haven't been life-changing, that have just been like, okay, here's some cool pieces that, nobody's going to buy as many of this CD as my CD of the Brahms Concerto, but that's fine. But this particular album led to my serving on diversity panels and having a lot of requests from students, parents, and teachers asking for repertoire by composers of African descent for various skill levels. And ultimately, I realized that all of the incredible work being done in academia by all of the great Black music researchers just wasn't filtering out to the general populace. And, only geeks like me read research journals for fun, right?
Yeah.
So even, the stories of the all Black orchestras in America of the 1800s that were the equivalent of the Negro baseball leagues, or the fact that Coretta Scott King and Frederick Douglass played the violin. All of these things that, this is part of African American heritage. It's not somebody else's music. That the stories as well as the repertoire are so important for kids feeling like they had a place in this art form and feeling inspired to be part of classical music's future. So, so I decided to start this project and felt definitely out of my depth back then, 20 years ago, but was lucky that a lot of incredible educators, composers, conductors, researchers, all the heavy hitters, and that they were willing to be on our advisory committee and help guide our path. And so we started with the curricular volumes, which included the biographies of the composers, also role models. Now, of course, Sphinx has been around, for many years and has changed the world. But even still, you can go to a town in the U.S. and not a single teacher in the public school system, the music teacher, not a single music teacher in the public school system of that town is Black. Not a single teacher at the community music school is Black. Not a single member of that town's one professional orchestra is Black. And so, it's hard for kids to really see a future for themselves. So we decided to have these role model profiles in the pages of our book, where not just soloists, but also string quartet member, concertmaster, youth orchestra conductor, all the different professions you could follow, Suzuki teacher, just all the different things you could do with your life if you grow up playing the violin and seeing somebody who looks like you, who's talking about their journey and giving you advice and stuff. So that the feature stories, the repertoire itself, graded by skill level for beginners to advanced students. So we're about to come out with volume 2. We're working on volumes for viola and cello. We've expanded far past just these books, which were our original entire idea, but now we have repertoire directories for professional level performers with links to where you can hear the music, where you can obtain the music, because a list of titles is, unless you have the background in research skills to track something down, and why should everybody have to repeat the same steps? So we have all that data up there. We're expanding those lists with ever more instruments, and we have discographies, bibliographies, a list that I really love of children's books that are either about Black performers, Black composers, or books that have illustrations with children of color, or by African American authors, all on the topic of classical music specifically. Not to somehow make the point that classical is better than other musics, because that's not where we're coming from. But classical music, among so many musics, has been not considered to be a Black type of music, and so we're focusing solely on classical music in an effort to change that reputation and combat that misperception. So we've got all kinds of stuff up on our musicbyblackcomposers.org website. I definitely did not spend any time pandemic baking or Netflix binging in 2020 because, and I will probably never get bored for at least the next 30 years based on the number of items on our to-do list. So it's really fun that, it's funny because it's like, something that's really important for society, but it's also like totally an indulgence for myself because I love music research. I love classical music access, music education, obscure repertoire. I mean, I love, the great, famous, beloved masterpieces as well, but the more rep, the better, if you know what I mean. And finding, neglected gems is just like, whoa, and so I'm getting to do all of those things and doing good for the world while I'm at it. And the funny thing is, people think this is my big focus, and the truth is it's not. I have all kinds of other areas of interest when it comes to music research that I do spend time indulging in. But none of those have any social justice element to them. So, like music for unaccompanied violin from the 1600s. Okay, well, that's interesting, but yeah, not anything that's going to catch on anytime soon. But yeah, so this is actually just one of many things that I love to learn about. But in this particular case, it's something that I can also share with people and be helpful with, which is really gratifying, needless to say. And it's been so exciting to see other people getting excited about discovering this music and adding it to their repertoire, and teachers starting to expand, the mix of things that they're doing with their students, and how positive that's been. I think the best thing that is when I hear, but I mean, it's, certainly representation for its own sake is undeniably important. But when I hear teachers go beyond that and say, oh, I really enjoy teaching such and such a piece because those low ones are really useful. Or the 6/8 rhythm is something that it's good to have a piece that addresses that. When they're talking about the actual, or, oh, my kids just love the melody of this piece, it's so beautiful. Then it's not like we're playing it because it's by a Black composer and we should. It's like, no, we're playing it because it's pedagogically valuable. We're playing it because the music is super catchy. We're playing it because we like playing it. And, that I think is the best statement of all. And it proves to me that this music would have been in our canon all along, if not for deliberate discrimination.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such an important contribution because, as you said, the canon needs to be enriched by this repertoire, and also it has such intrinsic social value to it.
Yeah, and I think it's just, normalizing it's super important, obviously, for African-American children or Afro-European or Afro-Latino children, various places in the world where kids are studying music, to feel like they have a place and that they do have a history with this art form, and embrace that and celebrate that. But I think it's also super important to normalize for kids of all races and ethnicities that this is everybody's music. Frankly, we all suffer if the slice of repertoire that we're exposed to is narrow, because classical music is supposed to express our humanity. And if only part of our humanity is being expressed, we're actually not doing right by the art form.
Yeah.
In a very, sort of direct sense, classical music is losing out.
Absolutely. Rachel, I'm having such a great time speaking with you, and the listeners can't see this, but I'm smiling ear to ear. And there's so many more things I wish we could discuss, but how about a round of rapid fire questions before I let you go?
Oh dear. Okay. I have no idea what this is going to be. So
what is a habit that you have that you think contributed to your success?
Oh, goodness. A habit. Yeah, maybe, honestly, yeah, I do think physical human health. I'm vegan. I only eat like unprocessed foods. I mean, I'm not like, crazy and restrictive, but, I eat definitely a very, very healthy diet. And I think that treating your body like an athlete is actually just as important as the practice hours, so that your muscles can take it. Also, listening to your body, so that if you start to feel a bit of strain, you don't have that macho sense of, I'm going to push through the pain. It's like, nope, I gotta rest. And which can sometimes go against our wanting to work hard personality. So yeah, I think being able to achieve what I have technically is definitely, treating yourself very consciously and, what's the right word? Disciplined, like an athlete.
Great advice. What skills do you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to learning to play their instruments?
Oh, that's a really easy one. I totally believe in nurturing creativity because as the technical level has risen and risen, I mean, Perlman used to be a prodigy for playing the Mendelssohn Concerto at age 13. Nowadays, you'd be like, oh my gosh, that kid is like totally behind. They're 13 and they're only now doing the Mendelssohn. I mean, honestly, when you're 25 and you're on stage, nobody knows or cares when you first played that piece. And I always feel like I need to remind parents of that. It's like when you're a new parent and one person's baby crawls when they're 6 months and another baby doesn't crawl till they're 8 months. And it's like, well, the 8-month crawler might be the one that goes on to be the Olympic sprinter. Like there's no correlation necessarily between great art and early blooming. And a lot of those prodigies, don't even go on into music. They like did their music thing and now they don't really want to keep doing it. So like, who cares? But the focus on, technique, and it's great that our pedagogy for teaching technique has become ever more refined. That's a positive development, but I think also because of like all the competitions and the quantity and quality of students doing really impressive technical things at really young ages, we're in danger of our art turning into a sport and it being all about the fingers. And so I think, bringing it back to expressive, if you look at history, and I'm, so into history, but, it used to be that people improvised, people composed within classical music. I think anything a kid can do, like, even outside of classical music, to just like relax with their instrument. Like, okay, let's play some Irish fiddle tunes and not care if I play every note correctly, care if I play cleanly. And you might think, oh my gosh, you're going to ruin your playing. No, actually, you're going to just help yourself relax your body. Your muscles will be more loose. And then when you go back to trying to play perfectly, you'll just be more centered. And, going to jam sessions where it's amateurs and professionals together and people of all ages, and you don't have this sense of competitiveness that you might in your youth orchestra. And music is just a communal conversation. Play along to a favorite song on the radio, or just make up your own melodies. So any of those activities with composing and improvising and playing alternative styles, far from, worrying that those might take away or somehow warp your classical playing. I think it all actually is so super healthy. Way back when I had my own studio, there was one time when one of my students' parents came to me and said, we're really worried because our son has started playing bass guitar in a jazz band. And should we allow him to do this? And I was like, whoa, that explains it. He's become so much more expressive lately. And, I don't think it was attributable to my trying to sing and gesture at him in every lesson. It was like this big change. And I thought, well, did he get his first girlfriend? Like, what's the, but no, it was because he was like rocking out. And then suddenly he started expressing his concertos and sonatas so much better. I was like, not only should you should you allow him to do this, you should encourage him to do this because it's really helping his classical playing. And I've seen so many instances of that, even if there's concerns about different types of tone production, like, should I let them play heavy metal on the violin and make scratchy sounds? Well, you play Debussy and you have floaty sounds, and that doesn't somehow harm your Brahms where you have to have thick sounds. So Tone colors are tone colors. There's no reason to not add a few more. It's not going to mess up your playing. It's going to just make you more imaginative.
Oh, I love this. Finally, how about an actionable tip that the listeners could implement in their lives today?
Okay. Well, I think, for anyone who isn't already doing this, the idea of planning. And I'm not talking about that crazy 6-month planning for me with my crazy concert schedule. I'm talking about the normal planning, which is weekly, right? So you look at what you have going on that week. Okay, Friday, I've got chamber music rehearsal. Saturday, I've got an orchestra concert. I have this other piece I need to have ready in 3 months, so I need to make a certain amount of progress on it. And you just look at what you want to accomplish that week, and you parse it out like, okay, I can't do everything every day, so Tuesday and Thursday, I'm going to do my chamber piece. Wednesday and Friday, I'm going to do my orchestra piece, because you don't want to get to Friday and go, oh, shoot, I forgot to do whatever all week, and now it's too late, and I have to cram, and it won't be as good. So you plan in advance to make sure it's all kind of spaced out evenly, and then you take the day-to-day, and you say, okay, I'm going to spend an hour on this, but what am I going to do during that hour? Am I working on intonation? Am I working on interpretation? Am I working on bow distribution? Am I just working on page 1, or am I going to try to, get through all 4 pages? So you kind of make a micro plan after you've made the macro plan. But don't forget to also include things like reading about music. Maybe you don't really know much about that composer whose work you're playing. So, read their biography. It's so easy these days with the internet, though sometimes not everything is on the internet, and physical books still have stuff that you can't find elsewhere. But read about your composer. Listen to recordings if you're learning a piece by so-and-so. Listen to not just other people playing that piece and other movements of that piece that you might be doing only one movement of. Listen to other works by that same composer, chamber, symphonic, etc. Listen to other music from that time and place. Listen to random other music that's unrelated to anything. That's not just, the pop music or whatever you might put on in the background of your life. It'd be like, I've always been curious to hear a few more medieval whatever's. Let's listen to some medieval music for 20 minutes and expand my musical horizons. So, build in some listening as part of your continuing musical journey. It's not just all about having your instrument in your hand. Sit down and look at the printed music without the instrument in your hands, not listening to recordings, not playing it yourself. Just look at the music and see what you can glean without being distracted by executing it. All those kind of things, and kind of plan it out and write down what you plan to do, but don't judge yourself, right? Don't be like, oh, I was going to do 20 minutes of Schraddick and I only got in 5. Well, hey, great. That's better than 0. And write down what you actually did, and that'll help you refine as you go so that you can say, okay, realistically, I shouldn't have planned to do 20 in the first place because there was actually no way that would have happened. I was being, kind of unrealistic. So then the next week, you can have a plan that's what you want, but is also closer to reality. And then you'll become ever more exact at prediction. But then also seeing, okay, I didn't get a lot of open string practice in this week. Let's make sure I prioritize that next week just because it kind of got neglected this week. And, so you're kind of keeping this journal. I know there are different apps. I have no idea if any of them are good or not. You can do it in a Word doc. You can do it in a good old-fashioned notebook. But something so that you're planning, you're chronicling, and you're fine-tuning, and you're making sure that whatever you do, you absolutely don't judge, with the exception of positive. Congratulate yourself if you're really happy with what you did, but don't be down on yourself if you're unhappy with what happened. Just be very, very forgiving. Ask yourself, if I was my own student, how would I respond to this? And don't be any harder on yourself than you would be on that other person.
Such great advice.
Actually, I want to say just one little last thing. I already said, it doesn't matter what age you first do something. That can't be emphasized strongly enough. Also, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to, improve something. It doesn't matter which challenges you have versus what somebody else has. We're always comparing ourselves to other people. And that can be a positive because, it provides motivation and inspiration, but it can also make us just feel bad about ourselves and frustrated, and that should never be the case. As long as we are on a positive trajectory and improving ourselves, we're going to get there in the end through our own journey. And that person that has that amazing vibrato that we wish we had, maybe they're struggling with their string crosses and envying us that we have great string crosses, and you just never know. And I'll give you a really good example of that. My worst technique was uppo staccato. I was born with exactly 0. I was like, and after a year of spending way too much time practicing it, I was like, I mean, it was absolutely pathetic. It took me years to be able to have a serviceable staccato. I was probably the worst in my studio at staccato. And there was this one girl who had a machine gun staccato. She was like, brrr, and I was just like, oh my God, I would, almost sell my soul to have her staccato, right? And years later, it turned out that her staccato was so fast that it was actually inappropriate for many moments in pieces like, Rondo Capriccioso. You can't suddenly change the tempo to twice as fast. And she couldn't do a medium speed staccato. And my professor said it took him just as much work to slow her down as to speed me up. And while, she could play a piece like Horace staccato at lightning speed, which I will never in my lifetime be able to do, no matter how hard I work. In terms of normal rep with staccato moments, she actually had just as hard a time as me. And that was a real lesson in terms of, just everybody's got challenges that you might be totally unaware of, and don't go around being jealous of someone or down on yourself, because each of us has our own issues, and nobody is born with everything.
Such wisdom. Rachel, what are some of your projects that we can look forward to check out in the next few months?
Well, I just recorded the Florence Price Second Concerto. It's going to be the second recording of that great piece, and that's going to actually appear on my old Black Composer Concerto record, which will now be retitled Violin Concertos by Black Composers Through the Centuries, for the 25th anniversary re-release, which will be this year. And I recorded the Shostakovich First along with the Earl Menian Violin Concertos. That's going to come out next year. And then I've got a concerto by an incredible Syrian composer that I'm going to record with the Vienna Symphony and Marin Alsop this spring, composer by the name of Jandali, and that's going to come out also, I think, within a year. So some various concerto records coming up. I definitely am still going to continue to do various stuff online because I don't think it's an either or. And you might, the more the better. I've loved how being online allows, people who are elderly or housebound for whatever reason, people who are young and wiggly, people who are in countries all around the world to be able to tune in. So I definitely don't want to just do in-person concerts because that's actually quite limiting. I have an idea of kind of like my RBP on JSB series on each movement of the Bach sonatas and partitas. I really feel like one of the barriers to being able to incorporate underrepresented repertoire, whether it's by different composers of color, by women composers, etc., stuff that is absolutely fantastic but hasn't been part of our repertoire. You can go online. If you're learning the Tchaikovsky Concerto, you can listen to dozens of commercial recordings on Spotify by artists both living and dead. You can watch hundreds of live performances on YouTube, and you can study with any number of thousands of teachers who've learned it from their teacher, who learned it from their teacher. You can even watch master classes of people working on the Tchaikovsky together. You want to study the Florence Price Second Concerto, there's almost nothing. And so, just to have that knowledge of what are some solutions to technical difficulties, what are some ideas about how the character should be, just all that kind of standard information that we have about our standard repertoire that's just in the air. So I have an idea of myself and as many colleagues as would like to participate, having a series, not with a student necessarily, but just kind of like my RBP on JSB, where I'm just talking to the camera and working through a piece. For a lot of these, my daughter just learned Clara Schumann Romance No. 2, and I feel like that's such a perfect piece for intermediate level kids. And it really should be just one of the go-tos, like Luke Melody or Meditation from Thais, etc. Only people don't know how it goes, so I want to do an episode on that, etc. So that's a project that I haven't launched yet, but I'm certain that I will be launching within this calendar year. And of course, the MBC is ever expanding, more and more publications, more and more online resources. Never a dull moment there. So, and then you can follow my tour dates on my webpage as usual. And hopefully I'm coming to your town soon. And there's various things that are being live streamed and, all of that's on my webpage. And just always looking for more things to do.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to have all of these links in the show notes. I've used the term dynamic force a few minutes ago, and I'm going to use it again. You're such a dynamic force in our community. You're an amazing example of what one can create with vision and passion and determination. It's incredibly inspiring to speak with you, and I thank you so much for this gift of your time and wisdom.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having this podcast. I'm sure you've positively impacted countless people of all ages, and that's such a gift.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with violinist Rachel Barton Pine. Don't forget to share on social media so many more can benefit from Rachel's insight, and tag us so we can say hi and keep this discussion going. I'm Mind Over Finger on both Instagram and Facebook, and she's RBP Violinist. As always, you can find all the information related to this episode in the show notes or by visiting mindoverfinger.com. While there, check out all the resources I have for you about efficient practice, performance preparation, and mindful music making. And make sure to visit in the coming weeks because I have a lot of great things coming your way, including the return of the Joyful Practice Challenge, a free performance masterclass, and a pretty amazing offer. So be well, my friends. Thank you so much for listening, and à bientôt.